What's up, Eager to Pleasers? Welcome back to another episode of the Eager to Please podcast. Joining us today, thanks to our good friends and supporters at Fresh Starts Registry, is bestselling author and youth development expert Malia Krauss. And my favorite part about her work is that it focuses on ensuring we're raising our kids to both endure and enjoy their lives. Stephanie, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Natalie. I'm so excited, eager to jump into the conversation.
Me too. I'm super excited to chat with you today about how modern life is training adults and kids to overfunction, overachieve, and overplease, often at the expense of our own well-being, because I know so many of us wrestle with that. So maybe that's a perfect segue for you to share a little bit about yourself and how you got into all the work you're doing around coaching people to rehuman their lives.
Absolutely. So we are connecting just weeks before my next book comes out, How We Thrive. And How We Thrive is really a book about collective care. And I think to answer your question is actually to understand the story that I've been on over the last 6 years with adults who are caring for kids all across the country and in other countries too. And that journey deeply resonates in my own bones as I raise my own kids and have the experience of being a working parent myself. So my background is in education and social work, and that has given me sort of room to play in who are we as humans and what does it take for us to be ready for a world that is often unfair and unjust and challenging, and what does it take for us to be well within it. And so in that work, I had a book, my first book, Making It, came out, and it was about what kids needed for the future. But the problem was that the book dropped right at the beginning of 2021 at the height of the pandemic. Right. So all of our households were homeschools. The world was completely shut down. And I found myself on this basement book tour where I was Zooming in with people and I couldn't get to them in person. And, I had my kids, I'm talking to you in my basement right now. And to the left of me was what we had converted as their play space that then grew into their schooling space. It was the all-purpose area. And so what I started to do was live poll every group that I spoke to. And because I needed to know how they were doing. These were groups of parents or teachers, youth workers, counselors, people who were caring for kids professionally or personally. And I asked 3 questions every single time to kick off the conversation. And those questions were, how are your kids? How are families? And how are you? And the results were always the same, and they just reverberated in my own body. So the results would populate in a word cloud. And I don't know if you've ever seen those, but the way that they work is every word that somebody responds pops up on the screen. But if you and I say the same word, it gets a little bigger. And if 3 or 4 people, it just keeps getting bigger based on the number of responses. And so the center of every word cloud for how are the kids, how are our families, how are you, was overwhelmed, overloaded, tired, and exhausted. And I also felt deeply depleted. And I felt deeply depleted with all of this research and background on what you need to be ready and what you need to be well. And so I started working on my second book because I would get these back chats from people when I was talking about the future, and it would go something like this. They would say, hey, thanks for coming today. It's really interesting to think about the future, but I'm actually afraid that my kid is going to burn out or give up before they get there. What do they need to be well? And for me, as a parent, I don't just want my kids to be well right now. The goal for me is that they have a good life. And that doesn't mean that it's an easy life. I want them to be good people and I want them to have good lives. And so with the second book, Whole Child, Whole Life, what I tried to explore was what I called whole life practices. What are the things like building community and belonging or prioritizing mental health that we need to provide to our kids when they're younger, but eventually they have to provide it for themselves. They have to protect it for themselves. They have to go out and find it. So I'm writing that book and the world opens back up and I'm back out on the road, but I keep asking the same three questions, whether it's in person or on screen. How are your kids? How's your family? How are you? And what I saw was that the words overwhelmed and exhausted and tired just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And they were edging out all of the pieces that make life wonderful, like playful or creative or introspective or quirky, whatever it was, those words were there, but they were just getting pushed out to the periphery. And that's when I started to write How We Thrive, because what I wanted to understand was there are timeless troubles that we've always had: abuse, neglect, hardship at home, grief, loss, disaster, all of those things. And they're still happening. But it seemed like if you were going through a hard time, there were forces at play that were making life even harder. And if it was a time of relative stability where you should be kind of enchanted with your life, you were still exhausted. And I needed to understand why for myself and my own kids, and also for all of us. I felt a great sense of responsibility of who else had the results of this kind of poll from literally tens of thousands of people who are caring for kids and really struggling to care for themselves. And so the last couple of years of research and writing have really been to try to understand. I think about it as a look back to the future, across time, across the millennia that humans have been around, what actually do we already possess that doesn't cost any money, that doesn't take any more time or effort, that we can tap into, that provides us the strength and capacity to be healthy and whole and human? And to your question about kind of how depleted so many of us feel, adults and kids, why is it so hard to tap into that right now? And what I found was, and I hope that we can, chat about it, is that there are some universal forces at play, things like addictive tech or a culture of toxic productivity over work that are so intense. I talk about them in the book as dangerous weather conditions, that they just batter us. I mean, they're just brutal. And if we don't have strategies to navigate those, we start to just fray. And so when I think about your beautiful, wonderful platform and this idea of us constantly feeling like we have to please, when that is happening in that kind of dangerous weather, then we never have enough time. We never have enough energy. We never have enough emotional strength because we're constantly being depleted, which is no way to human, right? That's not the good life I want for my own kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Where do you think this desire to be eager to please comes from? Is it ingrained in us when we're kids? Is it a learned behavior? I'm always curious about where my guests think that comes from.
Mm-hmm. So if we go back to talking about this science of thriving, who are we as humans and what have we always relied on historically in order to stay alive and also to thrive? One area of that I talk about in the book are our heart essentials, that we are we're made to connect and to love and to experience belonging. And so I think a lot of these eager to please behaviors come out of our biological wiring for attention and affection and attachment. And what happens when we're not getting it from the people who are closest to us? And that, again, that biological impulse of what do I need to do in order to feel attached and connected, to get the affection that I need to stay alive and to survive and thrive, and to, experience the kind of attention or affection that's really going to allow me to feel settled and anchored. So if we look at connection, for example, what we know is that we are social beings. And one of the things that I think is so powerful to understand is, the opposite of social health and connection is loneliness. And loneliness, we know we can feel when we're with or without people. I mean, we can feel lonely in a crowd, right? That's the phrase. And we can certainly feel lonely in our marriages, lonely in our homes. But the thing is that loneliness in our body, because of our Stone Age ancestors, it sets off alarm systems that says danger, danger, you're at risk of dying. And so we're flooded with energy, emotion, chemicals that say, go back to your people, go back to your tribe, go back to whoever's there. Because, millennia ago, other animals had speed and stealth and strength to stay alive. We banded together. That's why they called them bands of people. And so one part of this pleasing behaviors and patterns and showing up is we want to stay connected to the people that are closest to us, that are proximate. And especially for kids, we're going to contort and try and test everything possible experimentally to figure out what works. And then once we experience, oh, that worked, then it becomes this feedback loop. And so that then connects to our need for love. That really digs into the attachment piece. And so I think a lot of pleasing behaviors have to do with how securely attached we feel or not, and then where we get our validation and our identity and those pieces. And then the third interlocking essential here, so you have connection, that's sort of, am I connected to people who are going to keep me alive and that I need in my life, both on a health side and a wealth side, like a resource and opportunity piece. You've got the love, which is who's taking care of me and am I being taken care of and can I care for others? But belonging is about feeling welcome and wanted. And what we know is that the science of belonging is evolving at a rapid pace, but feeling like you belong has profoundly outsized impacts on your health, on your learning, on your work, on your life, all the things. And when we think about people-pleasing behaviors, that is an easy path to feeling like you are wanted and getting that instant feedback because you're performing, right? And you're producing and you're serving a purpose. But then there's that hollowing out because you walk away from that moment and you're like, God, they don't even really know me, or I don't even really know myself. Or there's an inauthenticity where you're rarely doing it with poor intentions, but you get the instant satisfaction of belonging and then this hollowing out because it's not belonging for the whole of who you are.
I want to sit in that for a second because you touched on a couple of things about inclusion and our youth. And so I know I said this during the intro that I love one of the pillars that you've built around your business is that you're helping our youth not only want to live good lives, but also love the life that they're going to live or that they're living currently. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on how social media and the perfect parent culture intensifies this urge to perform instead of live. Because just as an example in my own life, we were going to not allow our kids to have phones or devices until they were in 8th grade. That was just kind of like what we had in mind. Like at that point, you're getting ready to go to high school. Hopefully you're more mature and responsible with your phone or your device. And so we ended up caving a little bit early, like a year early, because our daughter was the only one who didn't have a phone in her friend group. And she's like, Mom, I feel like I'm left out of conversations. I don't know what's going on. I can't stay connected to my friends. And, this whole thing about, gosh, then we have to cave on our, stance because our kid is feeling left out. And of course your heart breaks for them because you want them to feel included. And yes, we have nixed all of this, like no Facebook, no Instagram. They are not allowed to be on those platforms. But I guess Snapchat is the next, thing, death trap almost, because it's still a social media platform. And, when we do these random checks and stuff, just to make sure that no one's, bullying or doing whatever on these social platforms, it's a scary world out there, Stephanie. And so it's like another thing that you have to be aware of. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on this whole social media and perfect parent culture.
Oh, I have so many thoughts, and I need to qualify that by saying many of them are because I have a tween and a teen. I have one kid who's in middle and I have one kid who's in high school. And we also, because of my work and background in child and youth development and human development, were a no devices, no social media family. And there was a real social penalty to that. My kids came home and we really had to work through how to perforate that boundary in a way that didn't cost them friendships or misinformation or moments. And one of the most important parts of that has been how we are educating ourselves and exploring it together as a family, because for our kids, this is happening to them. So, smart technologies came on around 2006. And so if you look back at the first quarter of the 21st century, anybody who's 25 and younger, they don't remember a world without smart technologies. And now you look at the rapid increase of artificial intelligence and the ways in which I have one friend, Rhonda, who calls it like the new microplastics. That AI is everywhere, really nudging and nurturing things in a nefarious way, not in a nourishing way. Our kids they're just surrounded and saturated by tech. And even when we keep them off of the obvious social media platforms like Instagram or TikTok, the algorithms and the behavioral economics of highly addictive, manipulative platforms still find them on YouTube, right? Still find them on platforms that their teachers are asking them to go on. So actually, I think that the real important question here is that there is, in the same way that like someone would peddle drugs, there's a peddling not only of the perfect parent, but of the perfect person. And that we are all susceptible to it, but our kids are especially vulnerable. These platforms prey on their developmental vulnerabilities. Sure. Yeah, so I want to just talk about what this looks like in my own life. And by no means am I doing this right, but I've been heavily involved in thinking about a lot of there are a whole bunch of lawsuits happening right now, and they've been on the news recently because some of the trials and sort of pre-trials are starting where states and schools have sued big companies like Meta, Google, and said, our kids are addicted to your platforms and products, and you've done it deliberately. We have evidence that you are hooking and harming them for profit and repeat use. And some of those families have lost their kids to suicide. And I know it's horrible. I write about some of this in How We Thrive. So One of the things that I'm always aware of is that we, adults and kids, regardless of age or stage of life, often go on these platforms or products initially for very normal, appropriate reasons. For our kids, for example, they go on because they want to connect with someone, they're curious, they're bored, they want to create something, they want to follow a celebrity that they think is pretty cool. And then addictive, manipulative platforms hook and harm them. Once they're on, they're subject to very, very powerful, potent algorithms that keep them coming back. The problem is that they can often look to their parents and even their grandparents and see the same hooked and harmed behaviors happening all of the time. And so, talking about social health and loneliness in these pieces, it's possible that in one house, I'm looking at a scroll that's talking about parenting and thinking, God, I'm not doing enough. Should our house be healthier, cleaner, greener? Should the kids be out more? Right. All of these pieces, even knowing the research that I do, really beating myself up. And then my kid could be in the same room, also scrolling on the device. And one of them is a baseball player and a basketball player. And he could be scrolling. And we have research, for example, that there's like 75% of the content on like the manosphere and masculinity is getting pushed to the kids by algorithms and not by their friends posting. And so here he is, and the algorithms are deciding that he needs to see, am I man enough? Am I a good enough athlete, right? All of these pieces. And then we come together at the dinner table. And even if I'm trying to do everything right, Natalie, I'm holding the tension that I'm not enough as a parent or as a professional. And my kid is sitting at that table and he is holding that he is not enough. Now, the difference is that he, at 15, is at the most crucial moment in his lifetime to figure out his identity. Who am I and where do I belong? I'm not. And so whatever we are feeling when we go on those platforms and we see whatever it is that communicates implicitly or explicitly that we're not doing enough, that we're not enough, that we could be doing better, we could be doing more, it is going to be magnified and intensified tenfold for our kids based on what they're seeing. Yeah. And so just to wrap this up, so what I'm doing is trying to walk into spaces with deep transparency with my kids, including my 12-year-old is the person who set my Facebook password, because I also get stuck. And I recently got back on Instagram and I'm like, why did I do that? I'm getting sucked back in. I have a platform based on how to be healthy, whole, and human. Why am I back on Instagram? So I think there is just this moment of a part of us just being really human with each other is to be transparent and honest in the journey and what it feels like for us, and narrating that out loud. Guys, I caught myself scrolling today and I saw this thing and I just need to say it. I need to say it out loud so that they have it normalized. But also, we do need to understand that developmentally, they are much more vulnerable than we are to the impression they get to whatever they're seeing. So I would say to you and your kids, no, don't put them on social media, and do have a level of protection, because these kids know they're being experimented on. And what I'll say, the last thing here is that with my 15-year-old, his own friends do the work of protecting him from what they're exposed to on social media. And while my 12-year-old can't say it yet, my 15-year-old can say, it's really frustrating that you have these limits. I also know it's the right choice.
Oh, see, that's a mature standpoint on that, because it's such a fine balance. I know that these social media tools are tools, and they can help, promote businesses and keep you connected. But it's also a time suck when you just get on there and you start scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. And then your mind goes wandering. Well, wow, look at them. They just went on this vacation, or wow, look at them. And then it's like the comparison game, which also puts you in a terrible headspace, which, you know better than to compare yourself to other people. You have to try to filter that out, but we're all human, and we're going to do it, and we're going to do it. So I'm with you. As long as we can, we have told our kids, no social media. You believe us, you will be better without it, because as adults, we get sucked into it as well. So.
And I will just say quickly that in terms of thinking about eager to please behavior, that we should know, and, for anybody listening, you should know that they're really uncovering how many influencers targeting kids and moms especially are actually AI generated. And so now we're measuring ourselves. And so for kids, often these are athletes, or like, this is how I'm eating and this is my workout, a lot of that kind of thing.
Right, exactly.
And so now we're judging ourselves against standards of perfection that aren't even personhood. And so I was hanging out with a couple of high school classes last week, and we were talking about AI. And I polled them the same way I polled the grown-ups, and asked them what they think of when they think of artificial intelligence. And the two biggest words on the screen, there were a bunch of other ones, were dangerous and helpful.
Interesting. Yin and yang, right?
Yeah. Right. Absolutely. And really trying to talk to them about, how do you tap into the wisdom of your own body to know, oh, that doesn't feel right, or, oh, that feels okay. We have to give ourselves a lot of grace and space to figure this all out. And it's not a place where perfection can live, because it's inherently very, very messy. And our kids are entrusting us in the same way that they look to us to model other relationships that have ups and downs. We live in a tech touch world. We have to model this relationship with tech that gives them healthy ways of seeing when it's challenging or hard, or when we make a mistake. What do we do and what comes next? But I think it's crazy and scary. It's on the dangerous side of these AI influencers on social media who are just getting direct access to us and our kids. Influencers influencing our behavior and our thinking.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think it's safe to say, and I'm sure you would agree, that we're living in this world that seems to be growing more unpredictable and challenging. So what are some tools or practical strategies that parents can use to help promote a healthy development of their children? Aside from modeling good behavior, putting your phones away, that kind of thing, what are some things that you're coaching, your schools and the other educators that you come in contact with on how to promote these healthy development strategies?
So I think that there are three things for us to think about. One is to understand what that dangerous weather looks like and the ways in which the pleasing behaviors live inside of that world. And so I'll come back there in a minute. The second is for us as the adults, figure out, how do we serve as safe harbors for our kids when that weather gets too strong and they're battered down, and in an effort to take care of ourselves as well, where do we go to find safe harbors when the weather is just wild? And then the second is to educate ourselves and equip ourselves on what it even means to be human. Like we talked about connection and love. And I think that the really good news when we get to that part is to understand that we are born already knowing how to be a human. It's just that life makes it hard. We already know how to eat and how to sleep and how to move our bodies and how to play. These are things that are evolutionary endowments. They're capacities that we crave and that we have. And the reason why I'm optimistic about that, or hopeful, is because little simple shifts that just signal to our body, you're going to get sleep tonight, or you're going to get 10 minutes outside, or whatever, will not solve the hardship of our lives, but it will make us healthier and happier. And I think this goes back to your endure and enjoy of like, for me, I think thriving in this crazy, changing, challenging world is a combination of enduring the challenges that you will inevitably face and enjoying life in the moments that you can. And I think by tapping into what we already have as our kind of human superpowers, while it may not save you from an incredible hardship, it sure will make you healthier and happier along the way. So if we go to the dangerous weather, there are really 4 weather conditions that are fueling so much of the depletion that kids and their parents, all of us, are feeling and facing. The first is feeling overtapped, like you just never have enough time or money to get done what you need to get done. And it's not just a feeling, like it is a fact. You know, we look at our calendars when we're looking at our kids' schedules and when we're looking at our schedules. And so a simple strategy for countering or navigating that feeling of being overtapped. And listen, like I'm a realist. I write, we have a whiteboard upstairs and I write our weekly calendar up. And by the time I get through my work, my husband's work, doctor's appointments and sports practices, there's just nothing left.
No white space. Exactly.
There's no white space. That's right. And so we need spaciousness. We need slowdown. And one of the most powerful things to consider is something called a time oasis. So there's a woman who wrote a book, Overwork, and another one, Overwhelmed. Her name's Bridget Schulte. And she introduced me to this idea of time oases, which ideally would be like a weekend, or it could be a time every weekend, but it could also just be like a half hour or an hour where all notifications are off, devices away if you can, and you are really just practicing presence. And the key is you feel time sort of lengthen. You know, there's a stretchiness that happens, but we want to work on time oases and practicing that kind of abundance, almost like we would work on a muscle. But I think back to eager to please, our kids will run themselves until they're completely depleted of energy and emotion because their days are so packed. They're waking up so early to start school. You know, my kids on a regular basis are waking up at 6 a.m. and they're not home from practices or games until 9 or 10 p.m. And that is too much. Which leads me into the second weather condition, which is our culture of overwork and toxic productivity. And so where we see those eager to please behaviors is when kids feel like there's so much pressure to perform and produce. And that comes from everywhere. It comes from the school, it comes from home, and there's a sense of, I've got to keep up, I've got to keep up. And so strategies that we can start to employ to rehumanize what it looks like to just take on a normal workload. So in my book, I talk a lot about this idea of rehumaning as a practice that we need to start instituting, because things like being overtapped, these dangerous weather conditions kind of pull us away. The winds are so strong that they blow us away from being human. So if kids are experiencing being overworked, which probably they are, like we just need to assume at default that they are, we can try to poke holes and reduce some of the pressure. And so for me at home, what that looks like is if my kids say, I don't want to go to that practice today, and they have a genuine reason why, I let them. If they are really deeply overwhelmed with homework, and I'm watching the heat go up, I might tell them we're going to take a break and we're going to go play a card game for 10 minutes and then we're going to come back. But we have to try to figure out simple shifts that just reduce the pressure for them, because we have to understand this, especially if they're in schools, the pressure is going to be incredible. And actually, in the book, Natalie, I have this like rendition. I worked with this awesome illustrator, Manuel Herrera, and we looked at an old cartoon that came out of people who work with folks who've been abused, like domestic violence. And so the old cartoon for domestic violence was a husband gets in trouble at work and he comes home and he hurts his wife, who turns around and yells at her kid. And then the kid goes and kicks the cat. And so we created a parallel cartoon for toxic productivity of parents are feeling so overworked in their own lives. And then they go home. We all do it. I do this. And we ask our kids, well, what are your assignments? Well, why didn't you do that? And you need to sit down and you've got to get your homework done. And don't you realize? And just ratchets up the older that they get. And then in the cartoon, but also in real life, I mean, this is inspired by my own life. The like high schooler turns to the middle schooler and says, just you wait till you get to high school. You know, and the middle schooler turns to the elementary school student and says, just you wait. So back to pleasing behaviors at the expense of their own health and well-being. Kids are trying to match the signals we give them that to be good enough as a learner and a worker, you have to produce and perform at a level that is consequential to your own humanity, your need for rest and downtime and balance and creativity. And so anything we can do to reduce the pressure, even in just little mini moments of how we're interacting, what our reaction is, what question we're asking first when kids get home, is going to help reduce that pressure. The third weather condition is around addictive tech. And I think that we've talked about that. And that really is educating our kids and ourselves on what's happening to us, what is being done to us for our attention and for profit and repeat use. And I really encourage anyone that I talk to not just get that content from their own social media feeds, but to go and do the research and do the thinking about those pieces. And for our kids, that is a level of protecting. You know, like, yes, second grade was when my own children started crying because everybody else had a phone. Second grade. And now I've got a 15-year-old who still hates it, but wants it. So it's this idea of like doing for them what they can't do for themselves. And then the fourth weather condition is the fear for our lives. It is the sense that things are scary and dangerous. They're uncertain and volatile right now. And they are. Like, we have experiences in our own life of school shootings and violence and other things that, in addition to the pandemic and anything else, are really destabilizing and just downright dangerous. And I think for our kids, navigating that weather, and also, again, having them not constantly
worry about
worry about it, is that balance of how much do I tell them is going on?
Exactly.
And how do I also keep them off of sensationalized media and news? But I think importantly is also equipping them and us with how do we regulate ourselves? How do we find spaces of safety and really move in that direction? So before talking about safe harbors, I just want to pause and see like if there's anything in there, especially as we think about us as parents and kids or just humans, that you wanted to dig into more. And if not, I can talk about what those safe harbors look like.
Yeah, no, I think that was a great highlight. I'm curious to see what your thoughts are on the safe harbor.
Yeah. So one of the things that, back to like deep overwhelm and overload of our lives, is that there is this sense that we just have to keep going, that we will let people down, that we will let the sort of standards that we're held to will collapse if we don't just keep going. And so much of the time that's at the expense of our own health and humanity. To give you an example of this, a really tender, hard example, again, thinking about kids and ourselves. A couple weeks ago, we very unexpectedly lost a friend who left behind 2 teenage sons and her husband. And I'm at the visitation and I'm talking to this shocked, horrified dad, husband, and the boys are there. And what he told me was this was a Sunday, that the high school expected his son back at school by Monday.
No time to grieve. It's just, you're right back in. Oh my gosh.
And then when you get back, it's very unlikely that people will pull him aside and provide support and talk about it. And, we're not trained in grief. And so there will be a sense potentially, I think this particular dad will end up fighting that and keeping his kid out as long as that child needs to be out. But there's this deep, deep need for us to rehuman our schools and our workplaces, because in moments like that where the storms are too strong, mom has died unexpectedly, the anchor of their lives, and they're still subject to the crazy calendars, the toxic productivity because the assignments are piling up. And what about college? And what about sports? And the tendency to want to check out and zone out because it's too hard and just hop on tech. And then also the fear for their life, like, am I going to die? All the pieces that come out. When that happens, we have to seek safe harbors. There has to be a place where we can go, or people we can go to heal and deal with the hard stuff. And so safe harbors really are like when you are in despair, where do you go for care and for repair? And what that looks like from a people perspective is that right now in the age of AI, there are these AI companions. Some people are going to ChatGPT and they're going to other platforms because they're available 24/7. They can answer all of their questions, but a safe harbor is not a bot, it's a body. We need humans, and we need humans who are holistic, who understand that you're not just a student or you're not just a worker. You're also all of these other things. You're a mom, you're a person, you're all of these other pieces, a daughter. And they also need to be humane. They need to be caring and thoughtful and really respect the dignity of who you are. And then on the other side, we need places that are safe enough for us to rest and recover and to seek refuge where we can be ourselves safe in a safe way. And so those are those safe harbors. And it's really important for us to understand when we're feeling depleted and exhausted. And especially thinking about people who tune into your podcast, and we're still feeling that pull to keep going, keep showing up, keep producing, but there's stress and grief and loss and hardship and all these things. What is the countercultural move to seek safe harbor and to replenish?
I was just going to say that, Stephanie, because how do we teach our kids to recognize that? I feel like, it has to be modeled by parents, I think. Just, I think you said something about like a mental health check or whatever. If your kids are feeling overwhelmed and they've got a ton of homework, do we really need to go to practice? Or can we just say, you know what? Yes, it's important to stay committed to your team, but if you literally are just feeling like you cannot, it's okay to say, I need to take a mental health check here and just pause. Yeah. And that's hard. That's hard to teach, I feel like, especially when you you have all these external factors, like you got to keep going, got to keep producing, the world's going to keep moving. You got to show up, or someone else is going to fill your spot. It's a lot of noise to filter through.
It really feels dangerous sometimes. Will I lose my spot on the team? Will I lose my job? Will I lose my standing as an honors student? Yes. Will I displease this person? Will I let them down? And we have to be, that's when we, the adults, have to be the steady, safe harbor to say, you have to take care of yourself. You're not meant to be living like this. I'll give you a really easy hack that I did with my kids just yesterday. And it might be something that is nice and practical for folks to do. So in How We Thrive, the last part that I sort of teed up is that I look at these human essentials. What are the things that for 300,000 years, humans, Homo sapiens, have been tapping into to stay alive and also to thrive? And they stretch. They're things, from sleep and movement to creativity and play to love and belonging, which we talked about, even to belief, like faith and hope, believing in something bigger or better. Well, they really nicely break into body, mind, heart, and spirit. Mm-hmm. And so I was traveling for work this week, and I got off the airplane and drove straight to pick up my kid from baseball practice. It's not even baseball season, Natalie, but they already have to be at practice every day. So I take him up and I stick him in the car. And as we're driving home, instead of saying, "How are you?" Mm-hmm. I asked him, how are things in your body?
Nice.
And then I asked him, how are things in your mind? How's your heart? How's your spirit? Now, he knows these questions and sort of where to tap into. He knows when I'm asking, how's your body? I want to know, in the last couple of days, how have you been eating? How have you been sleeping? Does your body hurt? You've been at these practices. When I ask how his heart is, I'm asking about his friendships. How have things been at home? How's he feeling socially? And so if we can give kids some of the shorthand to be actually assessing themselves and then asking themselves, how balanced do I feel in my body right now? And then we can follow up with, well, what do you need? What's going on? And so back to when a child says, I just can't keep doing this homework, or
it's so much, Mom.
Right,
yeah, I've heard it.
Oh my God, it's so much. I can't go to practice today. If you are regularly asking them and asking yourself, how's your brain? How's your body? How's your mind, your brain? How's your heart? How's your spirit? If you know that they're feeling spiritually depleted and they are struggling to feel a sense of connection on the team and they're just super tired and their body hurts, give them a break. Yeah. You would want a break, give them a break. And I think that it also activates us for when it's okay to speak up and ask for something different from a school. For example, we went through the winter and we had flu and strep and all the things. But one of the teachers actually sent an email that said, unless you're dead, you can get this done. And I thought, no, that's not. If my kid is sick with strep, with a fever in bed, I actually want to teach them what it looks like to rest. Right. I don't do it well. Yeah. I would like them to do it better, and so that then gives me the science to support speaking out and lifting up. Hey, they need to be sick right now. They need to get better.
Yes, exactly. Well, I just want to remind our listeners that your book, How We Thrive, is coming out in April. So be on the lookout for that. And I just wanted to open up the floor, Stephanie, to see if there's anything else that we haven't already talked about that you just wanted to mention to our listeners about the development of our children, because they are our future. And, sometimes we have to learn how to model appropriate mental health breaks for them so they know how to take that and carry that forward.
Yeah, I think I would say this. When I was growing up, I faced all kinds of adversity, and it was hard. I cannot imagine, Natalie, how much harder it would have been if it was happening to me right now, when I also had the onslaught of those dangerous weather conditions. If I was also subject to the frying and fraying of my brain with the tech and the obscene focus on hyper productivity, and the sort of calendar around signing up for all the things, and then the parent pressure of, well, I paid for this. You have to go. I paid for this. We don't even have the money. So there has to be a real perspective taking, even though we have been in the same house as our kids, that they have only known life being battered by bruising weather, and that they have lived through some of the historic firsts for us, have been defining features of their childhoods. What we know developmentally is that our kids are wired and rewired by their experiences, and they're taking signals from everything that's happening around them. While this weather is happening, we have to saturate them with the good stuff. We have to do everything that we can to really actively be rehumaning their childhood, meaning like this active daily practice and process of saying, how am I protecting and prioritizing your need for sleep, your need for healthy movement and not too much movement, your need for play, your need for joy and love and a sense of meaning, and that I will go and do anything in my power to make sure that you get that, because that's what it means to have a whole human experience, and it will also serve you forever. And so I think the last thing that I would say is there's a deep, deep need for us collectively in our homes and with our kids and with ourselves to be rehumaning, to be doing this intentional practice of really understanding the weather and how that's impacting our lives, seeking safe harbors when it gets too strong, and then realizing that it doesn't have to be so hard. Like, we don't actually have to live this way.
Yes. I love that. Yes. I could sit here and talk to you forever about this because I'm so passionate about making sure our kids are okay. And I love the work that you're doing. So where can people find you outside of this podcast?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So if you are listening to this in early spring of 2026, I would say go and find me at stephaniemaliakrauss.com. And by the time we get into April, when the book is released, April 2026 and forward, we'll also have a new website, rehumaning.com, where you can get resources so that you can start rehumaning your life and rehumaning childhood, and resources for the book. So stephaniemaliakrauss.com and rehumaning.com. And for folks who are on Substack, they can find me there as well.
Awesome. I love that. And we'll make sure to link all of your socials and your website to this episode so they can find you there. And Stephanie, again, thank you so much for joining us.